the ghost of her past life was a corner office on the 47th floor, a cathedral of glass and steel that kissed the Chicago clouds. In that life, Elara Valentine had been a high priestess of numbers, a forensic accountant at Veritas Analytics. Her sanctuary was the pristine, logical world of spreadsheets and ledgers. Her liturgy, the pursuit of a single, elegant truth hidden within mountains of fraudulent data. She had been good, terrifyingly good. She could sense a lie in a balance sheet the way a shark smells a drop of blood in a cubic mile of ocean. Her last sermon had been the unmasking of a $700 million phantom inventory scheme at a logistics conglomerate. She had traced the ghost assets through 3 continents and a dozen shell corporations, finally pinning the fraud to the company's celebrated CFO. It was the pinnacle of her career, a clean, beautiful kill. The celebration had been short-lived. The CFO, a man with friends in very high, very dark places, had not gone down alone. He couldn't refute Elara's numbers. They were immutable, perfect. So he attacked the messenger. A whisper campaign began. Rumors of her cutting corners, of fabricating evidence to build her own reputation, slithered through the corporate world. Her own firm, the one that had lauded her as a genius just weeks before, suddenly saw her as a liability. In a cold, sterile meeting, her boss, a man she'd once considered a mentor, had spoken of reputational risk and streamlining. He'd slid a severance package across the polished oak table, his eyes refusing to meet hers. She had been excommunicated, cast out from the only church she had ever known. The world of high finance had closed its gates to her, quietly, efficiently, and absolutely. Now, 18 months later, her world was no longer the 47th floor. It was the service corridors of the city's most opulent venues. Her view was not of the sprawling city lights, but of the swinging metal doors of a commercial kitchen. And the only numbers she crunched were the hours she needed to work to make rent on her tiny 3rd-floor walk-up. The humiliation was a constant, low-grade fever, a burn she had learned to live with. It was the fire that forged the placid, professional mask she wore with her uniform, a cloak of invisibility that was both a curse and, as she was about to discover, a weapon. A lone, discordant note from a stray text message alert pierced the symphony of self-congratulation. Julian Croft, a man sculpted from polished marble and inherited wealth, paused his address. From the podium of the Croft Legacy Foundation's annual gala, he held the city's elite in the palm of his hand. The air, thick with the scent of money, French perfume, and seared scallops, hung silent. He glanced down at the phone one of his aides had discreetly placed on the lectern. A single, cryptic message glowed on the screen. "The Nightingale account is singing too loudly." A flicker of irritation, so brief it was almost invisible, crossed his features. It was from David, his COO, the man paid an obscene salary to be professionally panicked. Croft prided himself on his composure, on the unbreachable fortress of his public persona. This message was a hairline crack in the marble. He dismissed the notification with a contemptuous swipe of his thumb, his lips curling into a practiced, benevolent smile. "Trivialities," he murmured, his voice a low, confident purr that the microphone carried to every corner of the grand ballroom. He had to project absolute control, especially now. The foundation, his father's legacy, was more than a charity. It was the engine of his influence, the source of his power. His father, a stern, imposing figure, even in the grand oil portrait that dominated the foundation's boardroom, had been a true believer. Julian was a believer only in himself. "Now, as I was saying," he continued, his voice dripping with synthetic sincerity, "our commitment to a better future is not merely a slogan. It is a promise, etched in stone." From the gilded edge of the room, near a service entrance that smelled faintly of disinfectant and desperation, Elara Valentine watched the performance. She saw the microscopic flash of annoyance in Croft's eyes, the tightening of the muscles in his jaw before the smile returned. It was the kind of micro-expression she was trained to spot. A tell. To the 1,000 people in this room, she was invisible, a functional component of the evening's machinery. Her uniform, a stiff, black polyester affair, was a cloak of anonymity. Her hands, raw from a day of polishing silver and hauling trays, felt clumsy holding the delicate, long-stemmed water glasses. She was not a waitress. Not really. She was a ghost, haunting the periphery of a life she once understood. The irony was suffocating. She had once audited foundations like this one, and now she was serving them lukewarm water. The gala was the pinnacle of performative philanthropy. Julian Croft, the foundation's chairman, was a master of the art. He spoke of lifting communities from poverty while wearing a Patek Philippe watch that could have funded a small village for a decade. He waxed lyrical about transparency, while his eyes, cold and sharp as chips of granite, seemed to calculate the net worth of every person he addressed. He was a perfect edifice of charm and charisma. But Elara saw the hollowness behind the facade. It was in the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the way he subtly angled his body toward the news cameras, the way his grip on the lectern was just a little too tight. The speech ended to a thunderous, obligatory ovation. The real work of the evening began. Elara moved through the crowd, a silent phantom with a tray. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and listened. When you are invisible, you hear everything. The whispers of a political deal being brokered near the bar, the hushed gossip about a rival's affair, the brittle laughter of wives who knew their husbands were titans of industry and monsters at home. It was a river of secrets, and she was standing on its banks. A quiet commotion near the silent auction tables drew her attention. An older gentleman, his suit a respectable but dated tweed that screamed retired professor rather than titan of industry, had dropped his program. It lay open on the floor, its glossy pages splayed like a broken wing. He was a man out of place, a field sparrow in a flock of peacocks. A river of tuxedos and silk gowns parted around him, a wake of sublime indifference. No one broke stride to offer assistance. He bent down with a soft grunt, his face flushing with mild embarrassment as he struggled to gather the scattered leaves. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced Elara's carefully constructed composure. Her father, a high school history teacher with a passion for woodworking. A man of quiet dignity, fumbling with his grocery bags outside a store. As young, hurried people bustled past, annoyed at the obstruction. The memory was a hot coal in her chest. She moved without thinking, setting her tray of empty glasses on a nearby credenza. She navigated the current of apathy, reaching the man just as he fumbled with the pages. "Allow me, sir," she said, her voice low and even. She knelt, her movements efficient and graceful despite the starchy uniform. She gathered the papers, her fingers expertly collating them back into order. "It's a bit of a sensory overload in here, isn't it?" she added, offering a small, genuine smile as she handed the program back to him. "Easy to lose your bearings." The man looked at her, truly looked at her, his gaze sharp and intelligent behind a veneer of gentle confusion. His eyes were a startlingly clear blue, and they held no trace of the condescension she had grown so accustomed to. "That's an understatement," he said, his voice a gentle baritone. "It seems the primary currency here is noise." "Thank you, my dear. That was very thoughtful." He noticed the small, worn object pinned to her lapel, a tiny, hand-carved wooden bird, its surface smoothed to a soft patina by years of touch. "That's a lovely pin. A wren, isn't it?" Elara was taken aback. No one ever noticed the pin, let alone identified the bird. "Yes, it is," she said, her fingers instinctively brushing against it. "A gift from my father. He used to say that even the smallest bird has a song worth hearing." "A wise man," the gentleman replied, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer. My name is Cole, he added, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, his skin dry and cool. Elara, she replied, shaking it briefly before remembering her place and retreating. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Cole. I suspect I will now, he said quietly, before turning and melting back into the crowd. It was a fleeting, insignificant interaction, a tiny island of humanity in an ocean of pretense. But for a moment, Elara had felt seen, not as a uniform, but as a person. The memory of her father's pin, and this stranger's kind recognition of it, soothed the raw edges of her evening. Meanwhile, in a quiet alcove not far away, Marcus Thorne, the man known to Elara as Mr. Cole, was speaking softly into a discreet lapel microphone. The target is exactly as we profiled, he murmured to his associate on the other end. Arrogant, theatrical, and utterly convinced of his own impunity. But the organization, the rot might be deeper than we suspected. Keep digging into the Nightingale files. I want to know who authorized the initial seed funding. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. There's something else. A woman on the catering staff, bright eyes, incredibly observant. There's more to her than the uniform. Find out who she is. Later, the main event wound down, and the real business of the evening began. The glad-handing, the backroom dealing, the stroking of egos that powered the city. Julian Croft held court at the head table, a king on his temporary throne. He was surrounded by his coterie of sycophants, including the perpetually nervous David Chen, his COO. Their laughter was a little too loud, their nods a little too eager. Elara was tasked with water service for his table, a journey into the lion's den. She moved with practiced invisibility, her mind a fortress of neutrality. The final signatory authorization for the Amazon reforestation project, Mr. Croft, David said, sliding a leather-bound folder in front of him. His hand trembled slightly as he did so. Just a formality before we wire the initial 7-figure disbursement. All the paperwork is in order. Croft waved a dismissive hand, his diamond cufflinks flashing under the chandeliers. Formalities, David, are the boring scaffolding of great work. And for God's sake, stop trembling. You make the chair nervous. He picked up the hotel-provided ballpoint pen, grimaced as if touching something unclean, and tossed it aside with a clatter. Good God! Do they carve these things from plastic refuse? One cannot sign away millions with a pauper's pen. It's bad for the soul. His audience chuckled appreciatively. With a theatrical flourish, Croft produced a fountain pen from his breast pocket. It was an obscenely opulent instrument of gleaming black resin and solid gold, a Mont Blanc Meisterstück solitaire, a monument to itself. Now, this, he declared, holding it up to the light. This has the proper heft for history. A pen that understands the gravity of the numbers it writes. He uncapped it and poised the nib over the paper. He was talking as he wrote, high on his own performance, distracted by his monologue on the importance of decisive leadership. The project code is, let's see, a new one for the fiscal year, 9-4-B-N ... He scrawled the numbers with a confident, flowing hand. Then he paused, mid-signature. A deep, booming laugh erupted from his chest, a sound so loud and artificial it startled the nearby servers. "Ha! Look at that!" he bellowed, holding up the paper for his disciples to see. He was delighted with his own charming fallibility. A simple mistake. A slip of the pen. I've written 8-4-C-N instead of 9-4-B-N. My mind is clearly on the 8-figure endowments we secured tonight, not these paltry administrative codes. He tore the sheet from the folder with a grand, careless gesture, ripping it in half, then in half again. A magician destroying his trick. "Send it back to legal," he commanded David, his tone dripping with amused condescension. "Have some intern fix it. My signature is too valuable to be wasted on a flawed document." He caught Ilara's eye as she leaned in to refill his water glass, her presence a convenient prop for his lesson. "You see that, my dear?" he said, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Even titans make mistakes. The difference between us and you is that our mistakes are meaningless." He winked, a gesture of conspiratorial superiority, and his table erupted in sycophantic laughter. Ilara's face remained a mask of professional neutrality, but behind her eyes, a supercomputer that had been dormant for 18 months roared back to life. Her mind, starved for the complex patterns and logical puzzles of her former life, had snagged on the number. 8-4-N. It wasn't a project code. It wasn't a random jumble. Her blood ran cold as the tumblers in her memory clicked into place. The prefix 8-4-C was a ghost from her past, a phantom from a deep dive investigation she had done years ago on offshore money laundering networks. It was a routing identifier, a digital fingerprint for a specific, notoriously discreet banking institution in the Cayman Islands, the Caledonian Global Trust, a bank that specialized in untraceable shell corporations and had no extradition treaty with the United States. It was a bank for criminals, dictators, and corporate raiders. He hadn't made a simple mistake. He had, in a moment of supreme blinding arrogance, suffered a Freudian slip of the pen. On a document meant to authorize the transfer of charitable funds to a reforestation project, he had accidentally written the routing code for a black hole bank. He had revealed the path of the money. His mistake wasn't meaningless. It was everything. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She had to stay calm. She continued her rounds, her body on autopilot, while her mind raced. As she cleared away the dessert plates, her movements were fluid and invisible. One of the torn quadrants of the document lay near the base of a floral centerpiece, discarded like trash. With a practiced motion, her hand swept over the table, gathering crumbs into a silver tool. And in the same gesture, her fingers closed around the small piece of paper. She palmed it, the sharp edges pressing into her skin. No one noticed. To them, she was just the help, the invisible woman. That night, in her small, cramped apartment that smelled of old books and chamomile tea, the world of the gala felt a universe away. The polyester uniform lay discarded on a chair, a hollow skin she had shed. On the screen of her aging laptop, the Croft Legacy Foundation's public filings were displayed in stark black and white. To the untrained eye, they were pristine, a model of fiscal responsibility audited by a top-tier firm. But Alara was not untrained. She was a bloodhound who had just been given the scent. And the scent was rank with corruption. She smoothed the torn piece of paper on her desk. 8-4-C-N. It was the key. She worked for hours, fueled by stale coffee and a burning, righteous anger that tasted like vengeance. The foundation's expenses were bloated in specific, curious ways. Logistical and consulting fees for overseas projects were astronomical, with no detailed breakdowns. One project in particular leapt out at her, a name she'd heard whispered before: Project Nightingale. It was listed as a literacy initiative in remote regions of South America, but its expenditures were in the millions, with vague line items like community outreach facilitation and strategic resource allocation. It had been running for 3 years. There were no partner organizations listed, no progress reports, no tangible results documented anywhere. It was a ghost, a beautifully fabricated, multi-million-dollar ghost. The text message Croft had received: "The Nightingale account is singing too loudly." It was a warning. She began cross-referencing the wire transfer dates for Project Nightingale with Croft's personal travel schedule, which, thanks to his narcissism, was meticulously documented in society pages and news articles. The pattern that emerged was chillingly clear. A $10 million disbursement for Nightingale in March of the previous year coincided perfectly with Croft's charity fact-finding trip to the Cayman Islands. A $5 million transfer in June matched his sailing vacation in the Caribbean, a short flight from the Caymans. Another $12 million in October for Nightingale Phase 2 lined up with a banking conference he attended in Grand Cayman. It was a systematic, audacious embezzlement scheme. He wasn't funding a literacy program. He was funding himself. He was siphoning the lifeblood of the foundation money given by trusting donors to help the desperate and funneling it into an offshore empire of his own, using a ghost project as the vehicle and the Caledonian Global Trust as his vault. He was corrupting his father's legacy, turning an engine of hope into his personal slush fund. By dawn, her small apartment was covered in charts and timelines she had drawn on scraps of paper. The scope of the fraud was staggering. At least $50 million that she could trace, likely more. She felt the old thrill of the hunt, the pure, cold clarity of the truth. But it was followed by a wave of crushing despair. What could she do? She was a disgraced accountant working as a caterer. He was Julian Croft, a titan of the city, untouchable and insulated by layers of wealth, power, and lawyers. To accuse him would be professional suicide. They would destroy her, paint her as a vindictive, unstable nobody. They had done it before. But then she thought of the wooden wren pinned to her uniform, of her father's simple, unwavering moral code. Even the smallest bird has a song worth hearing. Her fear was real, but the thought of letting Croft get away with this, of letting him laugh all the way to his Cayman bank, was worse. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about the people who were supposed to be helped by that money. It was about the arrogant smirk on Croft's face as he called her life's work meaningless. A few days later, her catering company was hired for a smaller luncheon at the Foundation's headquarters. Alara made sure she was on the schedule. She needed to get closer, to see the inside of the machine. The headquarters was a monument to ego, a glass tower with a soaring atrium and a massive, intimidating oil portrait of Croft's father hanging in the lobby, his painted eyes seeming to judge everyone who entered. The kind gentleman from the gala was there, the one with the dated tweed suit. He was introduced to others simply as Mr. Cole, a visiting academic from a small university with an interest in philanthropic structures. He seemed just as out of place here, quietly observing from the corners of the room, taking notes in a small, leather-bound book. He was the only person in the room not trying to sell something, not posturing for position. Alara saw her chance. During a lull, as she was clearing plates, she approached him with a fresh cup of coffee. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "I hope you're finding your research fruitful." He looked up, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to recognize her instantly. He gave her a small, knowing smile. "It's illuminating," he said, his eyes scanning the room filled with self-important executives. "A fascinating study in organizational dynamics." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Tell me," he began, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "I was reading about the Foundation's past initiatives. I found a reference to a Project Nightingale, but the details were rather sparse. Highly ambitious funding for a project with very little public footprint. Do you know anything about it?" Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was no accident. The name, the specific question. It was a test. It had to be. No visiting academic would randomly ask a caterer about a defunct, deeply buried project. He knew, or he suspected. She met his gaze, a silent communication passing between them, two observers in a room full of performers. "I've heard the name," she said, her voice steady and deliberate, choosing her words with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. "I believe it was one of the Foundation's most ambitious projects. Also, one of its quietest. A flicker of understanding, of confirmation, passed through Mr. Cole's eyes. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Quiet things," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "often have the most to say, especially when they involve that much money." He took the coffee, his fingers briefly brushing hers. The contact was electric, a current of shared purpose. "Thank you, Miss Valentine. You have been most helpful." He knew her name. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just a kind old man. He was investigating, too. And he knew who she was. That brief exchange was the spark that ignited the dynamite. Elara knew she was no longer alone. Mr. Cole, whoever he was an ally, a powerful one. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A black sedan was parked across the street from her apartment building, its windows tinted, its presence a dark, silent threat. Paranoia or prudence? She packed her laptop and her research into a worn backpack and slipped out the back fire escape. She spent the next day at the vast, anonymous Chicago Public Library, using their public terminals to dig deeper, feeling like a fugitive. She found David Chen's name on the signatory documents for every single Nightingale transfer. He was the facilitator, the trembling, complicit gear in Croft's machine. She created a ghost email address and sent a single, anonymous message to David Chen's work account. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only 2 words: Project Nightingale. The response was not an email, but an action. The next day, on another catering gig at a different venue, she saw him. David was there, his face pale and clammy. He was speaking frantically into his phone in a hushed, terrified whisper. Elara, pretending to wipe down a nearby table, strained to listen. "I don't know who it is," he hissed into the receiver. "The message just appeared. We have to expedite the final transfer. The full remaining 18 million. Move it, now, before they freeze the account. Julian will kill me if—" He saw Elara and snapped his mouth shut, his eyes wide with terror. The ticking clock had just started screaming. They were trying to empty the account, to move the last of the stolen money before the net closed. She had to act now. She went home, ignoring the black sedan, and spent the next 36 hours compiling her evidence into a single, unassailable dossier. It was the most important work of her life. She created charts that showed the flow of money, timelines that aligned foundation disbursements with Croft's personal travel, and a detailed analysis of the legal loopholes he exploited through the Ghost Project. She attached the public records, the news clippings, and a summary of the banking regulations for the Caledonian Global Trust. She laid out the systemic rot, clean and undeniable. She had the crime, the method, and the motive. All she needed was the moment. She found an old, untraceable burner phone she had kept from a past investigation. She sent a text to a number Mr. Cole had discreetly written on a napkin and left on his plate at the luncheon. The message was simple. The Nightingale is about to fly the coop for good. Board meeting. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. The moment came the next morning. The foundation had called an emergency board meeting. Rumors were swirling about a major internal audit, and the anonymous email to David had sent waves of panic through the executive floor. Croft had called the meeting to project strength, to squash the rumors before they could take root. He intended to control the narrative. Elara, using her catering ID, bypassed the nervous security guards in the lobby. She didn't go to the kitchens. She took the elevator to the 50th floor, the executive wing. She had shed her uniform and was now dressed in a simple, dark gray business suit she had kept from her former life. It felt like armor. She looked not like a waitress, but like a prosecutor. In her hand, she carried a slim, black portfolio. She walked straight to the glass-walled boardroom. Inside, Julian Croft was at the head of the long mahogany table, his face a mask of controlled fury as he addressed the anxious board members. These baseless accusations, these whispers in the dark, are nothing more than the bitter grumblings of disgruntled former employees. The Croft Legacy Foundation is, and always has been, a model of integrity. Our books are pristine. Is that so, Mr. Croft? The voice, calm and powerful, came from the doorway. Elara stepped inside. A wave of confusion and outrage washed over the room. Croft's face contorted with rage, the polished marble cracking to reveal the ugly stone beneath. "Who the hell are you? What is a caterer doing on this floor? Security! Get this woman out of my building!" Two guards started forward, their hands reaching for her, but they were stopped by a raised hand. Mr. Cole, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, a position reserved for observers, rose to his feet. He was no longer the unassuming academic. He radiated an aura of immense, quiet authority that silenced the entire room. He had shed the skin of Mr. Cole, and what stood in its place was someone far more formidable. "That will not be necessary," he said, his gentle baritone now carrying the weight of command. He looked at Croft, and for the first time, Croft seemed to see him, a flicker of uncertain recognition dawning in his panicked eyes. "And who are you to give orders here?" Croft sputtered, his authority evaporating. "My name is Marcus Thorne," the man said simply. The name fell into the silent room like a boulder into a still pond. Marcus Thorne, the reclusive, almost mythical benefactor who had established the Foundation's single largest endowment 30 years ago, with the fortune his family had built over a century. The man whose money comprised over 60% of its assets. A man no one had seen in public for 2 decades. The man whose father had been best friends with Julian Croft's father. He was not just a benefactor. He was the soul of the Foundation. "And this," Thorne said, gesturing with a proud paternal warmth to Elara, "is my chief investigator." The color drained from Julian Croft's face. He looked from Thorne's stony, disappointed expression to Elara's calm, determined face, and in that instant, his entire world, built on lies and arrogance, crumbled into dust. "You laughed at a simple mistake, Julian," Elara said, her voice clear and ringing with a conviction she hadn't felt in years. It was the voice of the woman from the 47th floor, the priestess of truth. She stepped forward and placed her portfolio on the polished mahogany table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. "You laughed at a slip of the pen. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a confession." She opened the folder. Inside, the evidence was laid out with cold, forensic precision. The offshore account prefix, *8-4-C N star, the Ghost Project, Nightingale, the timelines, the flight manifests, the irrefutable digital trail of his grand larceny. You weren't building literacy programs, she continued, her voice rising with controlled passion, her eyes locked on his. You were building your own personal empire with money meant for children who have nothing. You stole hope from the desperate, and you laundered it through the Cayman Islands. This is absurd. A fantasy concocted by a disgruntled servant and a senile old man. Croft blustered, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his terror. He looked at his board, seeking allies, but found only averted eyes and pale faces. Is it? Marcus Thorne's voice was like ice. I have been conducting my own quiet audit for the past 6 months, Julian. My team has been tracking every dollar since I first grew suspicious of your lavish lifestyle. We knew the money was vanishing into Project Nightingale. We just couldn't find the exit door. Miss Valentine's findings were merely the final, elegant key that unlocked the entire sordid vault. She found the door, your arrogance left wide open. As if on cue, the boardroom doors swung open again. This time, it was not security guards. 2 men and a woman in dark, severe suits entered, their badges from the FBI's white-collar crime division glinting under the recessed lighting. Behind them stood an official from the state attorney general's office. The trap, meticulously set by Thorne and sprung by Ilara, was now complete. Julian Croft stared at the federal agents, then back at the waitress, the invisible woman who had brought down his kingdom, and the kind old man he had never bothered to notice. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The Titan had not just made a mistake. He had built his throne on a foundation of them. And it had all come crashing down because of the one person he had never thought to look at twice. He didn't laugh this time. No one did. In the aftermath, the Croft Legacy Foundation was not destroyed, but reborn. The scandal was explosive, a cleansing fire. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the shadows, taking direct, public control. He purged the corrupt board members who had been complicit through their willful ignorance. David Chen, facing decades in prison, became the prosecution's star witness, detailing every transaction, every secret meeting, every late-night call from Croft. The story became a media sensation. The billionaire philanthropist unmasked by the quiet waitress who was, in fact, a brilliant financial analyst who had been wrongfully cast out by the very system she now helped to cleanse. Veritas Analytics, her old firm, issued a groveling public apology, and fired the executive who had forced her out. It was a vindication so total, it felt like a dream. Thorne did not forget the woman who had handed him the truth on a silver platter, or rather, in a black portfolio. In a press conference announcing the Foundation's complete restructuring and rebranding as the Thorne Legacy Initiative, he publicly commended her. Integrity, it turns out, is not found in the grand pronouncements of the powerful, but often in the quiet diligence of those who go unnoticed. It is found in the people who, despite having every reason to be cynical, still believe in doing the right thing. He offered Alara a position that was not a reward, but a recognition of her true worth. Chief Oversight Officer, the head of a newly created, fiercely independent division of forensic accountability. She was given an unlimited budget, a hand-picked team, and the absolute power to investigate any project, any executive, any expense. No questions asked. She was to be the Foundation's conscience, its incorruptible heart. Weeks later, Alara stood in her new office. It was Julian Croft's old office on the top floor of the tower, but it had been stripped of his ostentatious furniture and redone in clean, minimalist lines of steel and light wood. The intimidating portrait of Croft's father was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant, abstract painting that Thorne had chosen. The panoramic view of the city skyline still felt unreal. The scent of new beginnings had replaced the smell of old books and chamomile tea. She held the small, wooden bird pin in her palm, its smooth, familiar shape, a grounding presence in her new reality. The door opened, and Marcus Thorne entered, a warm smile on his face. He was no longer Mr. Cole, the tweedy academic, but he still had the same kind eyes. "Settling in?" he asked. "It's a long way from the service corridor," she admitted, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's exactly where you belong," he said. He looked at the pin in her hand. "Your father was right," he said softly. "The smallest bird can have the most powerful song. Your song just brought down a corrupt forest." Alara smiled back, a genuine, unfettered smile of a woman who had found her way home, not to a place, but to herself. He also used to say that people like Julian Croft build their houses on sand, she replied, her voice steady and sure. "They're so busy admiring the view from the top, they never notice the tide coming in." Together, they looked out at the city, no longer a landscape of impossible heights and invisible barriers, but a community of possibilities, a place where justice, once in a while, could be delivered by the most unlikely of hands. Faith, she realized, wasn't about believing in the powerful to do the right thing. It was about believing in the power of the truth, and in the courage of the quiet ones, the invisible ones, who were brave enough to sing its song.